So the basis of if we are programmed by our own past tendencies, I mean, really this is very similar to the materialist view. We all agree we're programmed with the past tendencies. We just think it's mummies and daddies' tendencies, isn't it? The principle is the same, It's the same. But except that Buddha says you program with your own tendencies, which is kind of interesting. And frankly, it seems logical to me, but this is not how we think in the West, in the modern world, that if I've got my mother's and father's tendencies, and they made me, I don't think I've got too much choice. What? It's kind of like quite difficult, isn't it? You go to your therapist and she says you've got to stop blaming your mother. Well, I suggest she's wrong. If your mummy is a maniac and makes another maniac, well, excuse me, your mother's to blame. I agree. But the Buddha would say she didn't make you. She just provided with a womb, You brought your own stuff with you. So if, taking this view that we are the product of our own past, good and bad, and the point being we have this phenomenal, astonishing, remarkable, amazing, over-the-top potential to be fully developed in goodness and rid of all the badness. This is Buddha's point. Otherwise, my feeling is otherwise, where are we heading with all this stuff? If we are stuck with the brain we're born with, which now, amazingly, we do realise we're not, then my feeling is just get along with life and do your best, But the Buddha's view is fundamentally there's no karma we can't change. There's no imprint we can't remove from the mind. Yes, it's difficult. There's no mind we can't change. There's no state of mind we can't change because they're all impermanent. And his own direct finding from his own experience is that our natural potential is to be fully developed in the bliss and clarity and joy and love and compassion, and the other stuff can be got rid of. That's where you're going with this stuff, So where you're heading with all this stuff is to stop your own suffering, because who wants suffering? And then the compassion wing is help others on the basis of this, because we're all in the same boat, This is the idea. But if it's reasonable. If you got the wisdom wing is where you put yourself together first. You can't have like I said, you can't have a flea. You can't have anybody if you're really caught up in your own misery, your own victim mentality, your own blame, your own fears, your own dramas, your own suffering. I mean, many people in life are just struggling literally to survive nightmarish lives. Of course, you can hardly lift a finger to help somebody else. So to start to put ourselves together first is incredibly important stage of spiritual development. To know your own mind well. And this is where first control your body and speech. So this is where the basis of all this is morality. Because suffering comes from following deluded, negative tendencies, and happiness comes from following and practicing virtuous, positive tendencies. So given that we all don't want suffering and do want happiness, and that's a really powerful point, Got to recognise that. So for this first stages of practice where you start to use the view of karma to recognise what it is that informs who you are, then you recognise you're sick of suffering. You've got to first recognise that. But then you've got to know what causes it. Because the first noble truth is Buddha's explanation of what suffering is. And let's go into this in more detail because his view is quite precise and goes into more subtle levels than we would think. And then the second noble truth is what are the causes. And then the third one is you can be free of all the rubbish, and the fourth one is how to do it. Sort of practical presentation of Buddha's approach to life, Buddha's approach to the development of our own potential. So even the first one then, what is suffering? Well, this is already kind of interesting because there's different levels of suffering as far as the Buddhist approach is concerned. The first one is what we all agree is suffering. It's when the bad things happen. It's pretty straightforward. This is the default view of the universe. You observe the dogs, the giraffes, the humans, we can all deduce it's when the bad things happen, that's what we mean by suffering. That's what we try to resist. The mean words, the unkind actions, the cold, too hot, lousy food, the red lights, torture, rape, you name it. Simply speaking, when the bad things happen, that's what we mean by suffering. So Buddha would refer to that as the suffering of suffering. It's like in-your-face suffering. No problem. So he would suggest it has causes. So of course that sounds pretty logical. We all know that things have causes. So it's a question of what you call, it's a question of how you identify the causes, isn't it? I mean, the reference point for this business of looking into what suffering is and its causes isn't meant to be to rub your nose in it, The reference point is the third one where he says, you know what, folks, you can be free of it. So in order to, if you want to be free of a problem, you've got to first identify the problem. That's what suffering, it's called suffering. What's the name of the problem? How does it function? But then you've got to identify the causes of it so you stop doing more of it. It's pretty reasonable, And then the fourth noble truth is the method of what to do, which is all the practices, blah, blah, blah. So if we look at the first level of suffering, called the suffering of suffering, like I said, we all know that one. So then if we want to go, without going to the second kind of suffering, which we'll go into in a minute, which is more subtle, and it's kind of depressing, because it's what we call happiness. So we'll go into this more in a tick. Okay? So then the first one, if we look at this, what the suffering of suffering, that's pretty easy to identify. We all know, we all recognise in our life, like the sickness, the bad things. This is pretty clear. So then Buddha says there are causes of it. And this is the crucial piece. We can all identify suffering, but it depends on what you think the causes are. And if you don't locate the right cause, it's sort of obvious, you'll never get the solution. It's pretty clear. So of course, if you're a materialist, the cause is, mummy, daddy, the genes, the DNA, the body, the environment, the people out there. And there's some truth in that. You can't say there's not. Buddha's not being sort of absolutist and saying, no, the rapist doesn't play any role in your suffering, Robina. That's plainly absurd. Of course they do. But you could say simply, and this is what I use it's always often good to use extreme examples because it's so shocking to our mind. And remember the same with happiness. We can extrapolate here. The exact same logic refers to happiness when good things happen. Okay, so the materialist view, and no, forget the materialist view, look at our instinctive view. If Vasilis punches me, the instinctive and immediate response would be, he is the cause of my suffering. I'm crying. Why are you suffering, Robina? Well, Vasilis punched me. No one would argue with that, isn't it? It seems evident to us. This is the world's view of suffering. People get harmed by others. It's pretty clear. And you can't say he doesn't play a role. Buddha just goes into a little bit more deep. And he would suggest that, there is a cause for why even Vasilis punched me in the first place. In other words, there's a cause of why I even got punched. You could argue the cause of my suffering is this pain now, my nose is hurting, the blood's coming, I've got a headache, Pretty reasonable. Yeah, Vasilis punched me. Don't argue. But Buddha's answer about karma is how come he punched me in the first place? And that I would suggest very straightforward. In the West, we don't have answers like that. Because, we assume mummy and daddy made me. So we go back to there to find the causes, the genes, the DNA, the world, and so on. And this is where, like you very nicely said, Claire Maria, there's implications. You said that, implicated. Yeah, we're implicated. There's this very intimate relationship that we must have from past lives, and he comes along. The fact that we even meet each other is no random event. The fact that we even meet each other is no random event. So what Vasilis does to me, how he sees me, how he treats me, is that, simplistically speaking, but nevertheless, truthfully speaking, according to this view, there's no way in the universe you could have a result, you could have an action happen to you if you hadn't sown the seed. There's no way he would be kind to me if I hadn't sown the seed. This is not possible, Buddha says. The law of karma is that if you sow the seed, you get the result, and if you get the result, you must have sown the seed. So the result means what happens to you, and the result means what's inside you. Basically that, the tendencies. Like I keep saying, the forget the human one, that's the fruit of karma, but within the human life, there are 3 ways our karma ripens, and you can see this covers the entire world. Each individual being. Your own tendencies, whether you're a lion, Hitler, Mother Teresa, or us, and your experiences at the hands of others. It's a simple way to put it. Your experiences at the hands of others, all the good and all the bad, simply speaking. And you can see we're highly social creatures. All the animals, all the humans, we're intensely social. Look at us. Constantly meeting beings. Constantly being harmed or helped. This is the intimate relationship we have with each other, again and again and again and again and again and again and again. They have this very funny story. You always read it, the Lamas always quote, And a lot of the stories are kind of all just oral tradition, so they kind of end up having different variations of all these stories. And one of them is that Shariputra, one of Buddha's main disciples, and the level to which you can develop your mind, with Buddha's view, as I'm saying, is quite remarkable. You can develop the point where you've gone beyond all the delusions, you can have clairvoyance. This is a low-level realization, because mind at a subtler level, for the Buddhist view, when it's unencumbered by the delusions and you start progressing spiritually through your meditation, through your daily life, lessening the neuroses, unpacking these nonsense stories and eventually getting rid of them out of your mind altogether, then naturally you broaden you expand, quite literally, expand your consciousness. Your capacity for cognition grows ever more powerfully, and eventually it includes the capacity to see the minds of others, to see the past, to see the future at the subtler level. This is for the Buddha is no-brainer, It's just natural capacity of all minds. Obviously radically different from the materialist view, because we talk about the brain. That's why we think people who are clairvoyant are kind of weird and wacko, But the Buddha would say we've had it many times, and not just to be randomly clairvoyant at every moment, like, I was an Egyptian princess 22 lives ago or something, but clear as a bell, crystal clear, ever more subtle capacity to see the minds of others. And actually, Buddha often says you can't really begin to benefit others until you've got clairvoyance. Anyway, there's Shariputra, one of his disciples, bopping around doing their arms round, with their begging bowl. And he's, reasonably highly realised being with clairvoyance and wisdom and all these things. And he sees inside this house, and he sees this man nursing a baby, eating fish, which his wife cooked, kicking the dog, who's eating the bones of the fish. And he goes, the man eats his father, nurses his enemy, while he eats his father, and kicks his mother while she eats her husband's bones. What a farce samsara is, he said. So it goes like this. With his clairvoyance, he saw the man is nursing a baby who is the reincarnation of the bloke down the road who raped his wife and whom he killed. Now it's his baby. He's eating this fish, which is the reincarnation of his daddy, because his daddy was very attached to catching the fish in the backyard pond. So now his daddy was born as the fish, and he's eating his daddy. And the mummy was very attached to that place, so she was born as a dog, and he's kicking the dog, who is his mummy, and the dog is eating the bones of a husband. What a farce samsara is.
Wow.
It's so different from our view. That's all I can keep saying, It's a very different view of the world, you've got to admit. So I'm happy to work with it. Whatever. Anyway, what a farce samsara is, and if it's true, then it is a farce, So, so, all these different relationships with each other all the time. So suffering, the first kind of suffering, is when the bad things happen, which usually means sickness, isn't it? Sickness, or when people are mean to us. And I'm not trying to be light when I say mean, because people are brutal to each other in this terrible suffering world. That's the first kind of suffering. Very clear. Everybody accepts that. So if we're taking Buddha's look at the world, then we ought to ask the question, well, this is true. I don't want that kind of suffering anymore. I can't stop it. It's now come. But what can I do to prevent having it in the future? That's the learning from it. So obviously, I have to know what causes it. It's sort of obvious. Like, what are the causes of this suffering? Well, Buddha says, Robina, darling, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's you doing the same things to those people in the past. So, darling, if you don't want it to happen again, then enter junior school. Don't kill, please. Don't lie, darling. Don't steal. Don't jump on the wrong partner. Don't badmouth. Don't this and don't that. Bare bones, 7 little things of body and speech, just to begin. At least back off and stop harming sentient beings. At least this. Of course, you start to get the hang of this, and you start to realise that you can deduce that stuffing 14 pieces of cake in your mouth will also be a useful thing to stop doing, because that increases your attachment, which causes you to do things to harm others. But the bare bones minimum advice that Buddha would suggest that we follow for our own sake, to stop future suffering. It's like a literal piece of advice. Don't harm others. That's the cause. So in a way, it's not complicated. We're all often sitting in this room, like, Clea Maria's saying, indicating, we've got these imprints. We might have this simple reason for it. We sort of think we just have a natural wish to be kind, a natural wish to be loving, to not kill. Well, the Buddha would say this is the logical reason. You've practiced morality in the past, and amazing, because this is the thing to do to prevent future suffering. Maybe not in this life, because the karmic seeds are all planted. Unless you pull them out, you might still get the car accident in 5 years' time, unless you pull the seed out first. But it's a long-term view that Buddha has. So the reason in this life bad things happen to me, the reason in this life good things happen to me, is because my past actions from the past life. Because seeds take time to ripen. So if I don't want suffering, which is the first level of ordinary, humble, simple, in-your-face recognition, I don't want more suffering. I am fed to the teeth of suffering. This kind of gross level, hardly rocket science. Then, okay, I'm going to take on board Buddha's view, his suggestion, work with it myself, and decide not to kill, not to lie, not to steal. Not for any grand reason yet, not for any compassion for others yet. This can also be part of it, but putting it in the context of the stages of practice, that's more advanced. Because I can't have genuine compassion for others until I've got it, in a sense, got it for myself. Until I recognise that my actions will bring my results. So I've got to first know I am sick of suffering, which is fairly reasonable. You go to the doctor, don't eat this, Robina, because you're going to get bellyache. Don't eat this because it's going to cause you to have a high sugar thing. Don't do that because you get cancer. It's sort of pretty obvious. And we know in our ordinary physical world that what I put into my mouth will bring consequences to me. So for my own sake, to be more healthy, no one calls you selfish. They say you're intelligent. Well, same here. It's not selfish. It's practical to not want suffering. And all Buddha says is, well, darling, don't cause it. If it's a law, it's hardly complicated, But we don't think it's this. We don't think it's we do think it's complicated in the West, because we know we didn't ask to get born. We know that we believe that Mummy and Daddy made me. So therefore, we don't have a reason why Vasilis, out of the blue, would punch me. We don't have a reason. There's no explanation in the West at all. The only explanation we have is why Vasilis would punch. But there's no explanation for why Vasilis would punch me. That's the one that Karma answers. It's Buddha's view. You have to believe it. I'm just saying, it's his view, his observation. So we know when criminals do things and wackos do things and terrorists do things, the first thing they do in the newspapers, everybody's, because this is the view we all have, they look into his family, why he's this way, why he did this, why he did that, like this latest German boy who, crashed the plane. All we're doing is look into his life. What he did, why did he do it? As if that answers the question for the poor parents whose baby just died. It doesn't answer the question, why me? And I find that really quite interesting. This is the question we ask. Why me? It's a huge question, and I think it's a very good question. But so explaining why this German boy, with his own bizarre mind and his whatever reasons, he decided to crash the plane and kill 149 people, it doesn't answer for why me at all. We don't have any approach to it in our world. The Christians would say it's God's will, if you want to have that really pure view of believing in God, or the Muslims, Materialists, we have no idea. Yeah.
What about all this positive thinking, Louise Hay and The Secret and karma? Like, when you change the way you think and you go to positive thinking, it's like many schools are teaching positive thinking.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Fantastic.
Louise Hay, The Secret, the movie, the book, everything. What about that and karma? Like, they say that if you change your way of thinking, you're going to attract only positive things.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes, I understand. I think it's perfect. It's great. But I've got a feeling it's not going deep enough. We're not going to the same level that Buddhists would say. Okay, putting it like this, for example. From past lives, we come into this life with all the seeds that will be the actions that will happen to us in this life. Like the seeds that you put in your ground 20 years ago will be the ones that will ripen in your garden. So just by being nice now, if you put seeds in the ground in the past, but now you're just being a nice person and putting in new positive seeds, it's not enough because you're not taking care of the seeds you've already planted in the past that will still ripen as future suffering. You've got to pull those out as well as sow positive
So
ones.
you're going to still pay the karma even though...
No, that's what pure... So there's two things. You've got to pull out. First of all, you've got to stop sowing more negative seeds. That's the very first practice. Stop killing. At least stop doing more killing. But that's not enough. In the junior school, you've also got to purify, pull out the killing seeds you planted in the past before they ripen. So just having a virtue is marvellous. It does create the cause, but that's of more good things, but it doesn't take care of the bad things. You've got to pull out the seeds. You've got to pull out the weeds. Purify the weeds. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, with that school they're teaching you for the future, but you're not purifying the seed. You're not pulling out.
Yeah, that's right. It's not enough just to grow more flowers. You've got to pull out the part. Yeah, so you've got to stop doing. You've got to stop sowing more negative seeds, and you've got to purify the ones you've already grown. So we're coming programmed with it. We don't see yet any evidence of. That's the Buddhist approach, I'd say. That's added to that, because it's true. How you think does create our world, no question. But in a long-term sense as well, quite literally, even your future lives. This is the Buddhist one. So how do you pull them out? That's the purification practice. We'll go into that. That's the 4 steps I mentioned briefly before, and we'll go into more detail. What time is it? I see. Okay. Let's talk about it now then, maybe. Okay.
What about the suffering of happiness?
Okay. Okay, we'll go to the suffering of happiness, or we'll go to how to purify the negative. We'll do both. We're going to do all. We've got 4 days here. We're going to get it all done, I promise. Okay, so I will discuss the purification practice later.
Tomorrow.
Which means tomorrow, isn't it? Are you guys living around here?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
We
You're
want
not?
to continue.
Huh? You mean you flew in from...
Some came abroad.
Huh?
No, you mean for the workshop or for the...
I mean, are you people in a hotel tonight or something? You're in the neighbourhood tonight?
Yeah.
Where are you?
Some people live here.
That's what I mean. So you people in this room now, after you leave here, you'll go home to some place?
Yes.
Nearby?
Yes.
Nearby, like a hotel or a house? Okay.
Within 5 kilometers.
Oh, okay, fine, okay.
Within 8 kilometers. You
So-
can walk from here to the end in half a day.
Okay, so I was just thinking...
kilometers all the island.
I understand. So I was just thinking if you wanted another session tonight. That's what I'm saying.
Yes,
Maybe-
because we also like to hear about what you people that believe about guilt.
Yeah.
Because
Well, it's sort of implied already, isn't it? When you have this view of karma, there's no guilt. Very clear. No anger as well. But we'll go into that. So all I'm saying, no, forget a session tonight. If you want to, all I'm saying is I'm around here. I'm here. It's my job. So people wanted to come back. But if this is enough for you by 7 o'clock, it's probably enough, right?
Some have the delusional story of families and kids.
Oh, I see. Also, you have that. Okay. So then we leave it. Okay, that's fine. We start again. What, darling? Yeah, Maria? What, Maria?
So, before you wrapped up, isn't it basically that we're making amends for our past actions?
Who? When? What?
When we're trying to correct.
No, okay, no. Okay, no. Like I said, first level of practice, and we look at what is suffering, and we look at the first level of suffering, is when the bad things happen. Speaking very simply. And the Buddha says, you know what, Robina, you have to learn what are the causes of this. You can't stop the suffering happening now. The punch already came. But I know from my experience, I don't like punches. So then Buddha would say, you first got to recognize you don't want suffering. And we're just talking the first level. So then he says, there are causes of it, Robina. And the cause of it is that I punched him in the past, speaking simply. So the logic from this, the deduction is, well, do I want to be punched in the future? No. Well, solution, stop punching. So the first level of practice is back off and don't harm sentient beings. That at least stops you from sowing more negative seeds. So far, so good?
Okay.
Then the next step in junior school practice, which is where we're here now, which is really my wish, I think we better go to the purification, we'll do the other one tomorrow, because we're in junior school here. That's not enough. That's not enough just to stop killing, because you've got billions of seeds in the past, killing, lying, stealing, harming, that unless you take care of those, they will ripen as more suffering. So we've got to get ahead of the game and do a bit of weeding. That's called purification. Are you with me, Claire Maria? That's the next bit. That's where, and we call it they use the term 4 opponent powers. It's just the 4 R's. Regret. And this is where guilt comes in. I'll go into this one. The next one is, I'll go the 4 headings. Regret, reliance, the remedy, and then resolve. And I'll explain. Okay, so regret is a really important one to get. The Dalai Lama was asked one time, what's the difference between what we call guilt and what this one called regret? And it's really, we can see it. It's based upon, the guilt we have is based upon the way ego works, which we haven't really gone to the mind much yet. We're going to do that more tomorrow. That'll get us to the suffering and happiness. We have this dualistic view of you're bad, I'm bad. One of the key functions of delusions is they exaggerate things. So if attachment exaggerates Vasilis's handsomeness when I'm in love with him, then when I hate him, then my anger exaggerates his badness. So he is an evil person. Before that, he was a divine person. They're both obviously exaggerations. It's more nuanced than that. And the same with our self. You know? We have the irony of this ego grasping is that we have this kind of self-loathing. We hate ourselves when we're really miserable. So this guilt is guilt is part of that. So you analyse what guilt is. So, okay, the Dalai Lama was asked, what's the difference? It was very sweet the way he answered. He said, guilt, you look in the past and you go, I did this and I did that and I did this and I did that. And then you go, and I'm a bad person. And this is pretty spontaneous for us. We assume it's a logical deduction that because I did a few bad things, all of me be a bad person. Now this is anger, but you're the object. Look what I'm mad at Vasilis. You did this, you did that, you did this, and you did that, and you're a bad person. So he did do those bad things, but he also did good things, you know. But the delusions, you know, when I'm in love with him, he's like a saint. And now he's an evil sinner. They all exaggerate the picture. So there's certainly our own self-loathing, our own guilt, our own self-hate, or whatever you want. They exaggerate. You know, you're not a bad person. Your actions might be not good. They have the saying in Christianity, it's lovely. Don't criticise the sinner, criticise the sin. It's a nice phrase. Be more nuanced with it, with yourself. So regret, he said, Dalai Lama, you look in the past, the first part's the same. You do acknowledge, I did do this, I did do that, I did do this, I did do that. But then you say, what can I do to change it? It's more optimistic. Because there's nothing that's set in stone, it's not permanent, and the irony of the way ego works, especially with guilt and self-hope and hopelessness and despair, is that this is permanent. I'm this forever, you know. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It feels like this. We didn't have to be taught this. We feel it's kind of stuck. But there's nothing we can't change. So this kind of view, you've got to first acknowledge that you ate that poison. And you don't want the suffering results, so what will I do about it? It's really obvious. And so this first one is this accountability. Well, I did kill. I have stolen, lied, cheated on, did this, did that. And if you've had countless lives, well, you know, you might as well regret the lot. And you say, whatever I've done in the past has harmed sentient beings, that's sown in seeds in my mind that haven't yet ripened. Hey, I don't want the suffering. I don't want these seeds to ripen as my suffering, because you know what? I'm sick of suffering. This is really almost like kindness to yourself. It's nothing to do with being a bad person or guilt. It's common sense. They always use the analogy as if you'd eaten poison. The attitude of you've eaten poison, and someone points it out, you're really on the case. You don't go, oh, I ate poison, I'm a bad person. And you get sicker and sicker every day just feeling guilty. It's insane. Instantaneously you're going to say, quick, where's the doctor? Why? Because you don't want suffering. It's kind of obvious. But when it comes to this morality business, we get very confused, you know. So the first step, you've got to acknowledge you ate poison, which means killed, lied, stole, badmouthed. Because why? Because those actions which leave imprints in my mind will ripen as my suffering. And I don't want suffering. You know what? I'm sick of it. So it's kind of reasonable if you take this view. It's healthy and optimistic. Because there is nothing you can't change. So the next step is very reasonable. Who can I turn to? Where's my doctor? And this gets us to the one of the relationship we have with the Buddha. So, if I'm a Christian, for sure, because God made me, I will turn to God and I will beg God to forgive me. Because forgiveness implies the power of someone to forgive me. Therefore, I have to apologize and that he will forgive me. And that is what purifies me. And that, I think, is in our own daily life, what the view we have. In my relationship with Vasilis, if I keep punching him, let's say, I have to ask him to forgive me, And if he doesn't, I'm in big trouble. I'm going to feel I'm an evil person. Whereas the Buddhist view would be, forgiveness is fine, but it's not the point. That's why it is the point if you're a Christian. God's forgiveness is what purifies you. Whereas for the Buddha, he's a nice guy. Of course he will forgive you, but that's not the issue at all. It's not even relevant. You purify you by changing yourself. You rely upon the Buddha. He's your doctor. He's your mentor. He's the one who's got these methods that you have chosen to use. That's the relationship. He's not your creator. Therefore, forgiveness has zero to do with it. You're using his methods. This is what I mean by refuge. You rely upon the Buddha. So, if you, just like the poison analogy, if you've taken poison and you've known some amazing doctor who's got all the antidotes, you're going to rely on every word the doctor says. You're going to be so grateful because you will then take the medicine they recommend. You do the work. This is what it is here. So you rely upon the Buddha, sure, but his method. Before you decide, you check that Buddha's a valid person. Don't believe him. Check it. Read his stuff. See if you want to rely upon him. This is why if you go to a doctor, there's two things. You've got to want a doctor because you're sick, or you don't want to get sick. And two, you've got to have confidence the doctor's good. So you better be clear if you decide to use Buddha's methods. You're the boss here, not Buddha. And then you're also in the second step, which is now where you have compassion for those you've harmed. It's like the first one's like compassion for yourself first. You've got to know you are suffering and you're up to here with it. That's what energizes you to want to regret what you've done because you're sick of suffering. It's very wholesome. It's kind of energetic. It's optimistic. Zero to do with guilt. Guilt is a terrible thing to do to ourselves. And also guilt, I think, is most interesting. The point I made here before. We're using mummies and daddies and God's views, other people's views. We use those to turn it against ourselves. We're the one who puts guilt in there. We're the one who hears it as a heavy burden instruction from someone else, and then we feel pain, We do the guilt, but it's everybody else's views. If you're accountable, you don't have guilt. It's not possible. It's impossible to have guilt with the view of karma. You're being accountable. You're grown up. You don't feel like a child. Self-blame. Not like that. So you have the second point, you have this refuge, rely on the Buddha, and then you have this compassion for those you've harmed. And if you're brave enough, compassion for those who have harmed you. Why? Because they will suffer in the future. You're suffering now because you've done it to them, which is the first step, regret of the idiot things you did in the past that caused you to get suffering. Now you have compassion for those who've harmed you because they're going to suffer in the future. And as the Buddhist view would be very much, until you have this basic view of understanding karma and taking responsibility for your own suffering, and of course your own happiness, you can't really have compassion for others. We'll go into this more when we talk about compassion. So then,
It's very difficult to forgive someone who hurt you.
Who said that? Yes, it is, isn't it? Definitely. No question. But I suppose, it's a question of the basis we have for why we want to forgive them, isn't it? And then an understanding of why they do what they do,
And why it's so hard for me to forgive.
Yes. So I suppose if we look into so just in general, what would you think of the reasons why we find it hard to forgive? What would be, is it...
Oh, you go.
Yeah, of course, for sure. But it's like if you have the view, the Buddhist reason for why I'm able to have compassion for you if you harm me, because I know I've harmed you before. That's the basis. But the Christian one would be the basis because God is in everybody, isn't it? So it's a question of what views we have, what informs our, And this I think is very strong. I'm not saying you now, but I think in the world, if we look at the materialist view of why people suffer at the hands of others, then I think we have this view very much of innocent victims. And as long as the victim is innocent, then we can have compassion for them. But it means we have to have anger at the person who did it, and therefore forgiveness is very hard to have, isn't it? And this is something so interesting. I remember my friends on death row in Kentucky, they told me this old Catholic guy would come visit. And his daughter had been murdered like 30 years before. And this old man said he was all those years, like most people, out of his brain with rage and grief and loss, but rage mostly. Unbelievable pain and suffering for years. And then he slowly decided to go back to Mass again, went back to church. And then he said it dawned on him eventually that the main reason he suffered was not because his daughter was murdered, was because of his own rage. And that's what's very painful to give up, is that this anger, this sense that I'm allowed to have anger because it's wrong. And the fear of giving up anger, sort of like you're almost giving up on the person that was harmed, or ourselves, you know. So it really takes courage. It takes such courage, you know, to do this. And different people. I mean, one time in San Francisco, we ran a conference. We had all these different psychologists talking, and there was one group of them, 2 people, dealing with this restorative justice idea, you know, bringing the victims and the perpetrators of crimes together to talk, you know. It's even based on some traditions of cultures where that's the way they would heal the problems. The victim and the perpetrator would come together and talk it through, and then there'd be forgiveness, and very amazing, very powerful, you know. So a friend of mine is a lawyer in Oakland, dealing with all the suffering of the young black kids there, and, you know, trying to use restorative justice. It's very powerful, but no one likes it, because we like to have innocent victims, and we want to have lots of people to be angry with, you know. It's a bit difficult. So anyway, this one woman, this friend of mine, Andre, and this one woman had a little conversation in the conference, and they both had had their children murdered. And one of them happened to be black, Andre, and he worked with me in prisons in North Carolina, working with the young black kids. And his son had been stabbed to death in a bar. And the other one was a white Christian woman from Texas, who'd spent years, went back to God, became a Christian, and wanted to meet, you know, the murderer of her daughter. So and she did. It was very moving for her, you know. So each of them was a very powerful experience. Andre, he was asked on the day, actually, his son was murdered, how do you feel about the murderer? He was in tears of compassion. He said his suffering has only just begun. You know, how can I not have compassion for him? The murderer of his own son. It's pretty amazing. He happens to be a Buddhist. And the woman said when she finally met this boy, and the boy was just so happy, this is just a young white boy, he was out of his brain on drugs, raped and murdered her daughter, he was 16, you know. And he said he was so happy to be able to meet her and to talk about it and ask for forgiveness and everything. But he said that when he shot her daughter, before he shot her, she looked him in the eye and she said, God forgives you, and I do too. That's intense, isn't it? When then you're murdered. That's beyond belief, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's astonishing.
Yep.
Such compassion, such a pure heart. Before you're shot in the head.
How come?
How come what? She was like that.
She died like that. If she was so...
Oh, okay, that's where karma from the past is why she died like that. Karma, good people die. Good people get murdered. Good people are tortured. So what you are in this life, in your mind, is due to those tendencies, but what happens to you is also due to other tendencies. Which is why you can say, why do good things happen to bad people, or why bad things happen to good people? Do you see what I'm trying to say? It's the same logic. Because these 4 tracks of karma, they're long term. You come into this life with good tendencies, but you might come into this life with terrible suffering at the hands of others. But the other way around. People who are evil all their lives have best friends and gorgeous girls and money in the bank and treated like gods, you know? Do you see what I'm trying to say? Yes. So then, and then this other one, Andre, yeah, I'll talk to them both. Anyway, yes.
Is it possible that we could consider this like desirable difficulty? I thought this was a beautiful idea. They were discussing people who were dyslexic and how having a problem could actually, over a long period of time, losing your parent, not being able to understand something, having to find another way, being in the jail, could produce a condition that would actually promote change.
Well, it does. See, again, this is how your mind works, because you said this, this is a variation of what you said before. You're right. You're right. You're right, Claire Maria. When we are stuck in our ways or the conditions, you know, we're stuck, then we're paralysed. But as soon as another condition comes along, like a broken leg, you know, you have a problem, it can cause you, if you're brave enough. But many of us, we just get angry and keep getting self-pity. If we're brave enough, we can get wake-up calls from all these experiences, absolutely. But it doesn't mean you've got to keep breaking your leg. Your ideal best not to have a broken leg. But if you're wise enough, you can learn from it. That's the real one. You understand my point? So, okay, where are we here? Wait a minute. The steps, all right. So the first step is you've got to recognise you're suffering and you're sick of it. And we're only talking the bad things here, not the more advanced levels of suffering. Don't worry about that. So what are the causes, Buddha? Where's the little book? Where's the boxes I tick? Oh, I must have killed, must have lied, must have stolen. I don't want that happening to me. I don't want to be poor, so I better not steal. I don't want to have people badmouth me, so I don't better badmouth people. I don't want people to lie to me, so I better not lie. I don't want to be killed or die young or get sick, so I better not kill. It's sort of not rocket science if you take this as your working hypothesis, you know. So you vow. You regret those actions because you don't want the future suffering. Then you think, who can I turn to? Rely on the Buddha and his methods. Then you have compassion for those you've harmed. Now you do a little practice, and we do different kind of things in the third step. It's like when you take the medicine. There's many methods you can do there. Even the most simple method, they often refer to this as the antidote. So if you're regretting killing, a really powerful thing to do in your daily life is consciously go and save lives, work with sick people, do things that actively go and are opposite to killing. If you are regretting lying, it's hardly a no-brainer. Consciously tell the truth. It's an obvious antidote, you know. But there are also certain practices we do, visualization, using mantra and things, and all the Tibetan lamas say are very potent medicines. We might go through this before we finish, you know. And the fourth step, in a way, is the most important. The first one, by regretting doing things, stops it happening to you in the future. And the fourth one, where you vow not to do it again, clearly stops you from having the habit to keep doing it. So Clea Maria has woken up in this life with a natural wish not to kill animals, kill creatures. We can deduce logically for the Buddha, she has to have been some kind of Buddhist in the past, because not many people say don't kill animals. Some good Christian, I mean, St. Francis was like that, wasn't he? Even though the Christians say it's okay, St. Francis never killed anything. Some people have this tendency, well, it has to be from having consciously decided not to kill, not to harm in the past. This is how come we have any imprints of morality at all. Which is why we should be so blissful with ourselves, you know. So rejoicing that we've practiced morality in the past. Because that's what we get programmed with. That's what we're born with, you know. Right there. Mummy didn't have to teach us many things we knew. We can see this. It's instinctive. It's amazing. The little boy had cried with compassion for the lice. Mummy couldn't possibly have taught him that at the age of 3. It was a spontaneous response, you know. So if we can imagine ourselves taking a future life, you know, it's like gardens. You sow seeds in the garden now for the veggies in the future. You don't get a veggie today. So it's like long-term view, you know. Not to mention radically changing even now. Things change now as well, you know. That's the purification practice. It's kind of psychology. It's your mind dealing with your mind, making decisions, regretting the ridiculous things you've done, because you're just sick of suffering, having compassion, doing a little practice, and vowing not to do it again. You're programming yourself in a new direction, you know, because nothing is permanent, and everything you think sows seeds. This takes care of the previous seeds planted, kind of to halt them growing, but it also continues the more powerful one of impressing in your mind the wish to not harm, not kill, not lie, as well as also adding to it the decision to be positive and virtuous and all that, you know. This is the first dealing. The first level is dealing with refraining from harming. The more advanced level is actively benefiting, actively doing good, you know. It comes along with it. Are we communicating here, people?
Yep.
So morality is the basis of it. Ethics. And it's not because Buddha says, it's because it's a natural law, Buddha says. Whatever we think and do and say will naturally bring consequences to me. So the first one is like compassion for yourself. Do not underestimate it. It's powerful. And it brings accountability, courage, self-respect, not guilt, opposite of guilt, self-respect. And finally, I feel like I'm in control and I can change. And then when bad things do happen, because you still haven't purified it yet, because these things take time, you at least can interpret it right and have courage in the face of it. Not panic attacks and victims, you know. And the learning from it is, I don't want this. So you keep remembering, you know, I won't sow more seeds of it. There's a practical reason for yourself that you want to be moral, not because somebody said you should, which brings guilt. Not that view. You own this as a logical view for yourself. This is the Buddha's approach. I mean, Buddha doesn't own this stuff, but he runs with this stuff, it's his thing. He didn't make up any of this, he's observed it, That's the approach to get. He's not a creator of all this. 5 to 7. So, I want to talk about meditation too, where that fits with everything. I don't know, enough food for thought? It's gone quickly, hasn't it?
Very.
I know, it does. I feel this sense of anxiety, I haven't got enough time to fit everything in. Okay, so we'll talk about the suffering. The next one tomorrow is a subtle level of suffering, which Buddha calls simply the suffering of change, but it's referring to what we call happiness. And I'll explain. And it gets us to go more deeply into the mind, and we understand here where attachment is the cause of suffering. Attachment is honeycomb and razor blade, which is so hard to see as suffering. We'll go into that tomorrow. And I'll talk about meditation, which we're sort of going to go to high school tomorrow, where we start looking into the mind. Because harnessing the energy of our body and speech, which is what we're mainly talking here, because I don't want future suffering, and purifying. Now I've subdued myself enough to want to go now to get to the root of the problem, which is the neuroses in the mind. So I learned to meditate and be my own therapist. We'll go into that one tomorrow. Then the compassion wing comes after that. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, darlings. It's very nice to meet you people. You're pretty intense and nice. I'm very happy. Very good.
Well, you're pretty intense.
I suppose it's true. We're all in good company then, aren't we? I want to sing a little wee prayer to finish. Can I do that? A little prayer to end.
Yes.
We call it dedication. So in the way that we motivated this morning, we kind of said we're going to listen to these teachings to see if there's some tools that we can use to help us develop our amazing potential so we can be a benefit to others. And this little ending prayer says, well, may those seeds we planted throughout the day, and as many thoughts as we've had, is as many seeds that we planted in our mind, Buddha would say. May we nourish these seeds from this moment forward with our efforts, our goodness, our accountability, our confidence, our self-respect, so that these seeds ripen in the development of our amazing potential, so we can, in fact, benefit others. And there's 2 little prayers, and the second one's just making the aspiration, the compassion, grow and grow in the hearts of all. Lama Sangye Drubgyurne Drowa Chikyang Malupa Day Sala Gopasho Jamchub Semchog Rinpoche Ma ke panam ke gyuching, ke panyampa me payang, gong ne gong du gavasho. Thank you. Thank you, darlings. Homework. Before you go to sleep, you say to yourself, may I see my dreams as dreams. Not remember your dreams, that's good, but when you're dreaming, to notice you're dreaming. All the Buddha's teaching, all the lamas would say, because we're so programmed with our habits, we're sort of unconscious much of the time, and we're always caught up in all the dramas of life. But even in dreams, we're completely caught up in all the drama. And then you wake up and you go, oh, it's just a dream. They often use that analogy about how to see life as just a dream. There's a great meaning to it. So practice even when you're dreaming to want to be conscious that you're dreaming, And the second one is...
I'm usually conscious when I dream.
Huh?
I usually conscious.
Oh, there you go. Well done. And you're conscious that you are dreaming.
Yeah.
You know you're dreaming.
I know I'm dreaming and I know how to wake up.
Well, there you go. Well, that means you've been, that's good. That's excellent. That's well done.
I sometimes change the ending of my...
There you go. There you go. Okay, all these are good. All these indicate you've been a meditator in the past. That you've got some clarity that you've developed from being a meditator. So rejoice. And we certainly practiced morality in the past. We wouldn't be sitting here otherwise. Okay, so the other one is when you wake up, and you should laugh now, if you wake up. Of course, we all assume we will wake up, because why? Because one of the big delusions in our mind, Buddha says, is we all believe we're permanent. You know, but we ain't. At some point we will be dead. So you try to think, well, if I wake up, you kind of bliss out. Wow, I can't believe it. My petrol tanker morality, which is the reason you're still not alive, not dead yet, while you're still alive, the main cause is your past non-killing virtuous karma that keeps the gas in your tank going, you know? That's what the Buddha would say. So we think how amazing I'm still alive. I'm going to get out of bed, come here, have my breakfast and come to the teaching, hear more teachings, see if there's some more tools I can use to help me develop my amazing potential, so I can be a benefit to others. That's your homework.
Okay.
If you want.
I didn't the last
What, darling?
I missed the
You missed the last bit. The piece of homework is when you wake up in the morning, notice you're still alive and go, wow, amazing, I'm still alive. My karma hasn't run out yet. I'm not dead yet. Because your morality karma is still existing. Your petrol tank isn't empty yet. Do you understand? Okay. The main cause of dying young or getting sick is past killing. The main cause of still being alive is virtue. Not conscious, non-killing karma.
Not gratitude, you mean?
Not gratitude, no. Delight that you haven't died yet, because your past morality is the reason you're still alive.
So we
You
should
can call it
actually feel
gratitude,
good
but
for
gratitude to yourself, because you've practiced morality in the past lives, that is causing you to still be alive, literally still breathing in and out. The main cause for the Buddha is your accumulation of virtuous, non-harming and active benefiting habits. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the simple one here is gratitude, fine, but the real one is, wow, I'm still alive. This is amazing. Don't take it for granted, in other words. So may I make the most of today? That's the attitude. Yeah, you understand? Okay.
Okay.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much. Well, let's sit here for a minute. You guys.